There's a silence that doesn't comfort. It corrodes. The kind that enters through your skin and sits behind your ribs. That's where letting go begins. Not with a goodbye, but with the quiet that follows it. They don't tell you this part. They talk about healing like it's a sunrise, gentle, warm, inevitable. But they forget to mention the darkness before it. The part where everything that once felt alive inside you starts to rot. Not violently, but slowly, almost politely, like your soul is too tired to protest anymore. I remember the night it started, not the end. That had come weeks before. This was the aftershock. The realization that they weren't coming back, and that the person I was with them didn't exist without them. You know that kind of pain that doesn't need words? The kind that hums inside your bones? That was it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just hollow. The world didn't stop. Cars still passed outside my window. My phone still lit up with meaningless notifications, but none of it reached me. It was like standing behind glass, watching life happen to someone else. I tried to remember how to breathe without thinking about them, tried to eat without imagining their voice across the table, tried to sleep without searching for the sound of their breathing. But grief doesn't disappear when you're ready. It lingers, testing your patience, rewriting your definition of okay. At some point, you stop waiting for them and start waiting for yourself to return. That's the cruel part about letting go. You expect pain to announce itself with screaming, but it doesn't. It sneaks in through small moments, the smell of their perfume on an old jacket, the empty side of the bed that never cools, the way your name sounds different when no one says it with affection. You start realizing that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently, learning to look at the memory and not flinch. But at this stage, I wasn't there yet. I was still in the part where even silence felt like betrayal. Every second stretched like a wound that refused to close. I wanted it to end. The ache, the noise, the pretending. But I didn't want to forget either, because forgetting felt like losing the last piece of them I still had. And that's when I understood the truth. Letting go isn't a moment. It's a slow death. It's the funeral of everything that once made you feel whole. But the world won't attend that funeral. It happens in your head, in the quiet between breaths, in the spaces between old memories and new emptiness. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to them, not aloud, just in thought, the way people pray to gods they don't believe in. I'd imagine them listening, pretending they cared, just to trick my heart into beating for one more day. That's what grief does. It bargains. It tells you stories where they still love you, still choose you, still exist in a timeline where things didn't fall apart. But every story ends the same way, with you waking up to a world that moved on without you. That's when I realized the death before peace isn't physical. It's emotional amputation. It's cutting off the part of your soul that still reaches for something that no longer exists. And like any wound, it bleeds first. But eventually, it scars. The death before peace isn't the end of life. It's the end of illusion. There's a strange moment after the loss when the pain stops screaming. It doesn't leave. It just puts on your clothes and walks around pretending to be you. You start performing the rituals of normal life. Keys, wallet, door, smile. But none of it belongs to you anymore. It's like you're borrowing yourself from yesterday. The mirror confirms it. Same skin, same eyes, but something vital has gone missing behind them. Like a light that forgot how to flicker. You study your own reflection until it feels like a stranger is staring back. That's the ghost. It doesn't rattle chains. It mimics your breathing. Friends ask, "Are you okay?" You nod. They believe the nod because it's easier than hearing the truth. The truth is that okay isn't a place you can live in anymore. It's a costume, something you wear when the world is watching. At night you try to sleep, but your mind keeps staging small reenactments of the life you lost. Tiny flashes. The way they laughed mid-sentence. The indentation they left on the pillow. The sound of a message notification that will never come again. You keep waiting for the next scene, even though you already know how the story ends. The psychologists call it attachment residue. The nervous system clinging to a pattern that no longer exists. But it feels more supernatural than scientific, like your body is haunted by muscle memory. You reach for your phone at 2 a.m., not to text them, just to feel the weight of the habit. Your thumb hovers over their name. For a heartbeat, you imagine typing "I miss you," and another heartbeat later, you imagine the silence that would follow. That's when the ghost exhales, and you swear you can feel it beside you. Days merge into a loop of half-dreams and small survivals. You eat because the body insists. You work because bills insist. You breathe because the universe insists. But living is on hold. This is the invisible part of grief, the part no one claps for. There's no celebration for endurance, no applause for showing up to your own emptiness. The world rewards recovery stories, not the chapters where you still bleed, so you hide the bleeding. You post something vaguely hopeful online. You answer calls in a voice that doesn't tremble. You act alive enough for the algorithm to believe you're fine. And when the day ends, you return to your room and the mask slides off with the light. The air smells like quiet again. You sit there staring at nothing, realizing that ghosts don't live in houses. They live in habits. But inside that haunting, a question begins to whisper. If the old you is gone, who's wearing your skin now? It's small at first, just curiosity. But curiosity is how rebirth starts. The mind begins to wonder if this emptiness might be a doorway. Because every haunting has a purpose. It keeps you company until you're ready to meet yourself again. You close your eyes. For a second, the ghost feels almost kind, like it's protecting the pieces you're not ready to touch yet. You let it stay. You let it breathe through you. And somewhere deep beneath the noise, a faint pulse of peace waits for its turn. Healing never knocks politely. It breaks the door, sets the curtains on fire, and asks, "Are you still alive in there?" I used to think the worst part of heartbreak was the silence, but silence was mercy. The worst part was what came after. The heat that rose from the ashes of everything I thought I was. Pain changes temperature when it's ready to teach. At first it's cold, a dull ache that numbs. Then, one morning, it begins to burn. Tiny sparks in the chest, an urge to move, to tear something down, to scream in a way that sounds like truth. That's the beginning of cleansing. The moment the body decides the ghost has stayed long enough. It doesn't feel noble. It feels violent. You break old routines like glass, delete messages, block numbers, throw away the hoodie that still smells like yesterday. Each act is a small rebellion against the gravity of the past. They call it progress. But progress doesn't look holy when you're inside it. It looks like chaos, like arguing with the mirror, like crying mid-laughter because the emotions don't respect schedules anymore. There's something almost chemical about it. The brain flushing memories through tears. The nervous system rewiring itself through exhaustion. It's biology, but it feels like exorcism. I remember one night sitting on the bathroom floor, steam rising from the shower I forgot to turn off, the air heavy, damp, blurring the edges of the world. And in that blur, something cracked open. Not the pain, it was me. The version of myself built entirely around another person's gravity. For a terrifying moment, I saw how small I had made myself to fit inside their love. How I had mistaken shrinking for loyalty, and the realization burned worse than the heartbreak ever did. Fire doesn't apologize for what it destroys. It consumes, and in the consuming, it reveals what cannot burn. That's what letting go really is, finding out which parts of you are fireproof. The next days were strange. I started to notice colors again, subtle ones, like the blue of early morning before the sun commits to rising. I caught myself humming without realizing it. Tiny things, but they meant something. Life was sneaking back through the cracks. Still, I didn't call it healing. Healing sounded too neat, too final. This was messier. An inferno that didn't promise salvation, only honesty. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m. with my chest pounding, a dream still clinging to my skin. I'd walk to the window, open it, let the cold air bite, and for a second I'd think, maybe this is what rebirth feels like, pain re-entering as proof of life. The world outside looked the same. Streetlights, empty road, occasional car hiss. But something had shifted in how I saw it. It was no longer a stage for memory. It was a place that didn't owe me anything. That realization hurt and healed in the same breath. Because sometimes peace isn't a gift. It's what's left after everything else burns away. After the fire, there's a sound that's almost silence. It's the sound of breath returning to a body that forgot how to breathe. For a long time, I didn't recognize this new quiet. At first, I mistook it for emptiness. The days stretched out like blank pages, and I didn't know what to write on them. Then one morning, I woke early. The world was washed in that thin gray light before dawn, and for the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. I made coffee without trembling hands. I didn't rehearse old conversations while the kettle hissed. I just made coffee. And that ordinary act felt revolutionary. They never tell you that peace arrives disguised as boredom. After months of chaos, stillness feels suspicious. The mind keeps waiting for pain to return, like a soldier listening for a gun that has already stopped firing. I started noticing small things again. The dust turning gold in the morning sun, the rhythm of rain on the windowsill, the way light bends around a glass of water, tiny details that had always been there, waiting for my eyes to open. When people talk about rebirth, they imagine something dramatic. A new city, a new lover, a new life. Mine was quieter. It was in the way I no longer checked my phone before bed, in the way my reflection no longer scared me. It was in choosing a walk instead of another argument in my head. Healing didn't announce itself. It crept in softly, barefoot, careful not to startle the survivor. Sometimes I'd sit by the window at night, listening to the city breathe, and I'd think about how strange it was that the same streets that once carried my sadness were now carrying peace, brick by brick. People think transformation means becoming someone else, but maybe it's the opposite. Becoming so fully yourself that you no longer fit inside the pain. I started writing again, not about heartbreak, not about them, about nothing in particular. Lists, thoughts, half-remembered dreams. Words that didn't need to impress anyone. Every line felt like a pulse, a quiet reminder that I was still here. There were moments I stumbled back into old habits. I'd hear a song and feel the ache, see a face that looked like theirs and feel the old flicker. But the ache didn't own me anymore. It was just a memory exercising its right to exist. The strange thing about rebirth is that it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like surrender, the kind that comes after you've run out of ways to resist reality. Peace, I learned, isn't the absence of pain. It's the acceptance that pain no longer defines you. I began to laugh again. Quiet, genuine laughter that didn't need an audience. The world hadn't changed, but my place in it had. For the first time, I didn't need to be found. I had become enough company for myself. The mirror finally told the truth. I wasn't who I was, but I was someone I could live with. There isn't a day when peace knocks and says, "It's me." It just begins to live in the pauses you used to fill with noise. It started one evening when I came home and realized I hadn't thought about loss all day. The absence of pain startled me more than the pain ever did. I stood there, keys in hand, waiting for the ache to rush back. It didn't. The silence felt friendly. Peace doesn't arrive as triumph. It comes as a small permission to sit, to exhale, to not need a reason. For months, I had carried the idea that healing meant forgetting, but forgetting was never the goal. The goal was remembering without bleeding. And now, when memory returned, it came dressed in calm. I thought I'd feel empty without the fire, but the emptiness was spacious, like a room finally cleared of debris. I could hear myself think again, and the thoughts were gentle. Sometimes I'd whisper their name, not out of longing but gratitude. They had been a chapter, and every chapter, even the painful ones, writes you forward. I forgave them quietly one night while brushing my teeth, of all things. Forgiveness didn't feel grand. It felt practical, like putting down a heavy bag you've carried too long. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time the eyes looking back didn't ask for anything. People talk about closure as if it's a door that slams shut, But closure is a window that you learn to leave open. You let the air move through. You let the past pass through, and you stop fighting the breeze. I began to notice the rhythm of my own life again. The kettle's whistle, the hum of the refrigerator, the heartbeat of a city that had never stopped beating. Everything sounded like belonging. Peace, I realized, isn't a destination. It's a practice, a choice to stand still in the aftermath and say, "This is enough." Not perfect, not painless, just enough. When people asked how I was, I stopped performing. I said, "I'm learning to live." And that was truer than "I'm fine." The more I lived, the less I needed the story that hurt me. It had served its purpose. It had burned me clean. Because peace isn't what comes after the storm. Peace is the moment you realize you are the sky, wide enough to hold the storm, calm enough to let it pass. I stepped outside that night, barefoot, damp pavement under my feet. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance a car horn echoed, ordinary, alive. And for the first time, ordinary was beautiful. The death before peace was never an ending. It was the sound of my old self learning how to rest, silence. They say the hardest part of healing is the pain. They're wrong. The hardest part is the quiet that comes after, when the noise stops and you're left alone with yourself. The first nights after the storm ended were unbearable. No messages to check, no apologies to draft, no heartbeat to sync with mine. Just silence. Thick, patient, watching me like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. I thought peace would feel like safety. It felt like interrogation. Every creak of the apartment sounded like a question. Who are you now? What will you do with all this emptiness? I tried to fill it. Music, scrolling, coffee, noise. But every distraction died too quickly, and underneath them the same truth pulsed. I was still listening for footsteps that weren't coming. The body takes longer to forget than the heart. My hands still reached for the other pillow. My voice still lowered when the room went dark, as if speaking too loudly might wake the ghost of what was. People congratulated me on my strength. They saw the surface, smiles, work, movement. But strength isn't what kept me going. Denial did. I was surviving on the muscle memory of pretending. One evening I turned off every light and sat in the dark. I wanted to see what lived beneath the pretending. The air felt heavy, the kind of heavy that bends your posture. For the first time I didn't try to escape it. I let the silence crawl over me, let it press its cold hands against my chest. And somewhere in that pressure, I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was mine. Peace had always been here, hidden under the constant need to be loved, understood, chosen. Now stripped of all that, I could finally hear it breathing. It didn't sound holy. It sounded human, uneven, uncertain, alive. That's the secret they never tell you. Peace doesn't arrive like sunlight. It creeps in like fog, and you only notice it when you stop running. I sat there for a long time, not healed, not broken, just breathing with the ghost that refused to leave. And for the first time, I didn't ask it to. Ghosts don't always come at night. Sometimes they live in daylight, in the taste of coffee, in a song you didn't mean to hear, in the way someone says your name too kindly. I used to think memories died when people left, but memories have lungs. They breathe through repetition, feeding on everything you refuse to let go of. Even after they were gone, I carried their world like a second skin. The playlists, the phrases, the way I paused mid-sentence to let them laugh, all those tiny unconscious devotions that outlived the love itself. Healing, I realized, isn't erasing someone. It's teaching your body to stop flinching at its own thoughts. Every time I tried to forget, the mind replayed scenes with surgical precision. The last smile, the last argument, the last glance that pretended it wasn't the last. The brain is cruel that way. It confuses closure with clarity. You start dissecting moments, searching for logic in what was never rational. But heartbreak isn't a math problem. It's weather. You can't solve it, only survive it. I'd wake some mornings to the smell of rain and feel panic rise in my throat. My body remembered storms it had already outlived. That's the strange thing about trauma. Even when peace comes, your nervous system still expects thunder. One night I whispered into the dark, "If you're still here, I can't keep carrying both of us." And for a second, I swear I heard the air shift. Not because the ghost left, but because I finally meant it. After that, the hauntings changed. They became quieter, almost tender, like my mind had stopped trying to punish me and started trying to understand me. I began walking at night again, under the same streetlights that once felt accusatory. Now they just stood there, silent witnesses. Every shadow looked softer. Every breath felt like reclamation. Maybe letting go isn't about evicting the past. Maybe it's about giving it a place to rest. The ghost didn't vanish. It evolved. It stopped being a weight on my chest and became a whisper in my ribs. A quiet reminder of how deeply I once cared. And in that whisper I heard something new. Not loss, not regret, just life continuing. They say fire destroys, but no one tells you it can also light the way back home. For months, I feared that my pain had changed me beyond repair, that it had left me hollow, unrecognizable, a silhouette of the person I once was. But the truth was quieter and far more complicated. The pain hadn't destroyed me. It had refined me. The more I looked at my scars, the more I understood them. Each one was proof that I had loved deeply enough to be marked by it. Each one held a lesson I had been too afraid to read. I used to think survival meant building walls, a fortress so tall that no one could hurt me again. But walls don't just keep pain out. They keep life out too. So one by one, I started opening the gates. At first, it hurt, letting light touch places that had only known darkness. But light has a way of teaching you to trust warmth again. One night, I found an old photograph. Us, laughing in a moment so unguarded, it almost hurt to look at. And instead of anger, I felt gratitude. That version of me, even if naive, had been brave enough to love without armor. I owed that version my compassion, not my shame. Pain had become my teacher. It taught me what it means to lose yourself in someone, and what it takes to come back whole. It showed me how to see people for what they are, not what I wish they could be. Healing, I realized, wasn't about deleting the past. It was about changing its meaning. The same memories that once broke me now became reminders of how far I had traveled. The fire hadn't gone out. It had changed form. It no longer consumed me. It illuminated me. Sometimes I'd walk through the city at night, the air cool, streetlights flickering like small constellations of forgiveness. The ghosts didn't follow me anymore. They walked beside me, quietly, as if they too were learning to rest. Because that's what growth really is. Not becoming untouchable, but learning to touch your pain without bleeding. For the first time, I could talk about what happened without my voice shaking, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controlled me. The fire still burned, but it burned inside me now. As warmth, as understanding, as the soft, steady light of someone who has finally come home to themselves. Pain made me a poet, but peace made me human again. Stillness is heavier than chaos. Chaos gives you something to wrestle with. Stillness hands you a mirror. I thought calm would feel like floating. It didn't. It felt like gravity had doubled, like every breath pressed against the ribs that once held storms. For the first time in years, nothing demanded fixing. No text to decode, no tone to analyze, no future to predict. Just me, untethered, unoccupied, unprepared for the quiet. The silence inside peace is deceptive. It doesn't hum like contentment. It hums like waiting. The mind, addicted to struggle, keeps inventing small fires. Did I heal right? Will it happen again? What if I'm only calm because I've stopped caring? I learned that peace is not the absence of questions. It's the courage to let them stay unanswered. Most evenings I sat by the window watching dusk pour itself into the city. The sky changed colors slowly, like someone learning to trust again. And I realized I was watching myself. Peace felt foreign because I had mistaken exhaustion for serenity for too long. True peace wasn't numb. It was alert, alive, aware. It noticed everything and still chose softness. Sometimes the body remembered how to brace for pain. The shoulders tightened, the breath shortened. Old reflexes, leftover armor. I'd whisper to myself, "It's safe now." And slowly, the body believed me. There's a rhythm to stillness if you listen long enough. The ticking clock, the steady heart, the quiet creak of a chair as you shift your weight. Tiny confirmations that life continues even when you do nothing to control it. Peace isn't a reward for surviving. It's the proof that you no longer need to fight to feel alive. I started to enjoy small things again. The smell of tea, the texture of paper under my hand, the low murmur of strangers talking through open windows, ordinary things that pain had once made invisible. And when thoughts of the past arrived, I didn't push them away. I let them sit beside me like old friends who no longer had power, just stories. The stillness grew lighter then. It stopped feeling like weight and started feeling like space. I understood that healing isn't a finish line. It's a language the soul keeps learning. Each quiet day another sentence, each breath another translation of what it means to be free. In the end, stillness isn't silence. It's peace, remembering how to speak. Every ending hides a beginning, but you only see it when you stop looking for one. I woke before dawn. The world was washed in a pale gold I hadn't noticed before, the kind that slides gently across the floor and waits for you to notice it. For once, I didn't reach for my phone. I reached for the window. The glass was cool against my skin, and outside, the city breathed. 1,000 quiet inhales, each one proof that life continues. Peace no longer felt fragile. It felt practiced, like a skill the soul had been rehearsing in secret. There was a pulse under everything, the kettle warming, the heart steady, the thought, I made it through. I realized I wasn't chasing calm anymore. I was participating in it. Each movement, each decision, carried the softness of someone who has stopped defending every breath. I walked outside barefoot. The pavement still held the night's rain. A bus passed, a dog barked, a woman laughed somewhere down the street. Small, ordinary noises that sounded like music. The ghost still followed, but quietly now. No longer clinging, just accompanying, like a memory walking me home. I didn't need to push it away. It belonged to me, to the life I had lived and survived. Healing, I understood, doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to breathe beside it. People sometimes ask, when does it stop hurting? I never know how to answer. It doesn't stop. It changes dialect. Pain begins to speak in softer tones. Less like a scream, more like a reminder. It tells you where you've been, not where you must stay. I sat on a park bench as the sun finally broke the horizon. Light spilled through the trees, turning dew into small universes, and I thought, maybe this is what resurrection feels like. Not grand, just honest. For years I thought letting go meant death, but death was only the cocoon. Peace was the wings. I closed my eyes and breathed once for the person I used to be, once for the person I had become, and once for the space between them, the place where all the ghosts learned to rest. The fire that burned me clean now lights the path ahead. I am not who I was, but I am finally whole. This is how the ghost learns to breathe. Not by leaving, but by teaching you how to stay. Silence. They tell you to move on, but they never tell you where. You crawl out of the wreckage and realize there's no map for who you are now. For a long time, I thought survival was the ending. But endings don't stay quiet. They evolve into beginnings that look suspiciously like mistakes. After peace settled, a restlessness began, a pulse under my calm. It whispered, "Now what?" The strange thing about surviving is that it leaves you hungry. Not for love or validation, but for meaning. You want to know why you went through the fire, why everything had to burn just so you could stand here breathing? I started noticing sparks everywhere, in conversations, in books, in the mirror, moments that reflected back fragments of the person I might become. It was frightening, realizing that growth doesn't wait for permission. It just happens like wildfire. Peace had been a lullaby. Now the world was percussion. Every sound carried a question. What will you build from the ashes? I didn't know yet, but I knew I couldn't stay still. Stillness had served its purpose. It had healed. Now it was time to move, carefully, consciously, into the unknown. I gathered small rituals, morning walks, journaling, speaking kindly to my reflection, tiny sparks of discipline that warmed instead of burned. They seemed meaningless at first, but healing is a mosaic of meaningless moments that eventually make sense. One evening, I found myself staring at an old scar on my hand. The skin had closed, but the color told the story. It wasn't ugly, it was evidence. Scars don't ruin us. They remind us that pain once had purpose. The longer I looked, the more gratitude replaced grief. I didn't need to hate the fire anymore. It had done its job. It had revealed what was indestructible. That night I wrote one sentence in my notebook. If the fire comes again, I'll know how to dance with it. And for the first time, the idea didn't scare me. It thrilled me. Because transformation doesn't happen when you avoid the fire. It happens when you learn its rhythm. Fire teaches habits you won't learn in comfort. It demands repetition, honesty, and a stubbornness you didn't know you had. When the first impulse to build returned, it arrived like a small, stubborn ember. Not the dramatic inspiration novels promise. No thunderclap, no sudden clarity. Just a steady, patient insistence. It wanted practice, not promises, not poems. Practice. So I began to train myself in small, ridiculous ways. I woke before dawn on purpose. I made my bed even when no one would see it. I ran for 5 minutes and then 10, simply to feel my lungs remember they could hold progress. These acts felt absurd at first, tiny rituals against the weight of what had happened, but they were the beginning of a new grammar. Discipline didn't arrive like armor. It came like massage, slow, painful, loosening the knots of old fear. Each repetition was a tiny re-education of the nervous system. Breathing through shock instead of panicking, letting anger pass without swallowing it, saying no when my instinct had been to apologize. There is a cruelty and a kindness to this work. Cruelty because you must face comforts you used to hide in. Excuses, easy apologies, numbing distractions. Kindness because you learn that you are allowed to choose differently, over and over again. I found myself surprised by the intimacy of these habits. Morning coffee tasted like ritual. It was not fuel for performance but a small oath to myself. I will show up. Writing became less about saving someone else with my words, and more about cataloging the weather of my interior life. Even the simple act of turning off my phone an hour earlier felt like a tiny revolution against the tyranny of reaction. Discipline carried with it a new language. Consistency over inspiration. Patience over fury. Presence over escape. It was boring work sometimes, more domestic than heroic, but boring is where character is made. Fire had burned away illusions. Discipline built quietly in the rubble. And with discipline came new boundaries. I started protecting my mornings like a sacred room. I said no to invitations that would drain me in ways I used to ignore. I learned to end conversations gracefully when they started to feel like old scripts. Those boundaries were not walls. They were door frames, clear entrances to who I wanted to be. There were failures, of course. Days when I slipped back into numbing, when the reflex to seek validation felt like an old friend. But the difference now was subtle. The slip didn't define me. It was noted, forgiven, and used as data. I returned to the practice, like a runner getting back on the track after a stumble. The discipline of heat is not punishment. It is the way you train your soul to hold flame without being consumed. At night, after a day of these small disciplines, I would sit with my notebook and notice how the ember inside me warmed the page. It was calm now, steady, capable of light without panic. I was learning to be both patient with the process and impatient with excuses. Slowly, those small actions added up into momentum. Momentum showed as a steadiness in the voice. It showed as fewer panic dreams and more long, uninterrupted sleeps. It showed as a willingness to stand in discomfort without immediately running for distraction. Discipline taught me an unexpected tenderness toward my past self for surviving, toward the present self for trying, toward the future self that might one day look back and nod. That tenderness felt earned. It felt like the quiet reward fire gives to those who sit with it long enough to learn its language. Pain has a strange way of humbling you. It takes away your illusions of grandeur until all that's left is the simple question: what can I give now that I've survived? After years of burning, surviving, rebuilding, there comes a morning when you wake up and realize you've been staring at yourself for too long. Healing can become a kind of obsession, the endless pursuit of inner peace, as if peace alone could justify the storm. But healing without purpose becomes another prison. The point of fire isn't to burn forever, it's to forge. I began to notice how quiet my life had become. Too quiet. There was safety, yes, stability, but safety can turn to stagnation if you don't step outside of it. The same silence that once healed me now began to feel heavy, like I was hoarding peace while the world kept bleeding. And that's when something inside me shifted, the understanding that survival is selfish only when it ends with you. I started writing differently, not about my pain anymore, but about our pain, the universal ache, the shared quiet. People wrote back, strangers, their words trembling through screens. This is how I feel, but never knew how to say it. Every message felt like proof that the fire had been worth it, because fire that stays inside you just smokes. Fire that's shared becomes warmth. So I started listening more to people's pauses, their unspoken sentences, the sighs hidden between words. There's a kind of empathy that only the broken understand. You begin to see fractures in others that you recognize as your own. You stop trying to fix them and start sitting beside them instead. Purpose, I realized, doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in disguised as responsibility, as the urge to reach out, as the decision to show up even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it meant helping a friend through something small. Sometimes it meant creating something I wished I'd had when I was breaking. Sometimes it just meant being honest, saying, I don't have answers, but I understand. Pain that is hidden festers. Pain that is offered becomes medicine. Each time I shared a truth, no matter how small, the ghost inside me quieted. It was as if it recognized that it had found its reason for existing, not to haunt, but to guide. One evening I sat down to write again, not for closure this time, for clarity. And for the first time in years, my words didn't feel like bleeding. They felt like breathing. The more I created, the more alive I felt, not because I was escaping my past, but because I was finally using it for something that mattered. I wasn't healing to move on anymore. I was healing to give back. That's the quiet truth about transformation. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming useful. As I finished writing that night, the room was filled with a soft orange glow from the candle beside me. The flame was calm, unthreatening. I watched it for a while, and for the first time in my life, I saw myself in the fire, not as destruction, but as light that could finally stay. Nobody warns you that freedom is heavy. It sounds like a gift, but the truth is, you have to carry it with both hands. When I first found peace, I thought it would fix everything. But peace doesn't fix, it reveals. It exposes the parts of you that only existed as reactions to pain. And when the pain is gone, so is your script. You have to learn how to live without rehearsal. Every day felt strangely new. The mornings had no mission other than existing. The heart, no longer occupied with survival, began to wander. And in that wandering, I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. I didn't know how to live freely. Pain had been my structure, my schedule, my reason to wake. Without it, I felt limitless. And limitlessness can be terrifying. Freedom demands choices, and choices reveal character. I had to relearn everything. How to rest without guilt. How to desire without fear. How to exist without a storyline. The world, once hostile, began to look inviting again. I started saying yes to simple things, dinner with friends, walks at sunset, moments that didn't need meaning. And yet in the quiet corners of my mind, a question whispered, can I really trust this peace? Because when you've been broken long enough, calm feels suspicious. You wait for the blow, the betrayal, the collapse. But healing means learning to believe that peace can stay. Not as a miracle, but as maintenance. Freedom is not the absence of control. It's the presence of choice. One afternoon I sat on a park bench and watched a child chase pigeons. He laughed when they flew away. Not sad they were gone, just thrilled they had existed for a moment. And I thought, that's it. That's how I want to live. Not holding on, not fearing endings, but celebrating appearances. For years, I had confused attachment with meaning. Now I saw that letting things go didn't make them less beautiful. It made them honest. To love something while knowing it might leave, that's freedom. Some nights, I still felt the ghost breathe beside me. But its voice was different now. Not haunting, just familiar. It would whisper reminders. Stay soft, stay open, stay alive. Freedom, I learned, wasn't light because it lacked weight. It was light because it taught me how to carry things properly. The heart doesn't need to clutch. It only needs to hold. And in that holding, I finally understood that peace was never the end of fire. It was the flame learning how to live without smoke. Real freedom is not escaping the past. It's walking beside it, unafraid. Every rebirth begins as a funeral. You bury who you were, and from that soil, something wordless begins to rise. I used to fear endings, thought they meant erasure, but now I see them differently. An ending is just life changing its handwriting. You can still read the meaning, but the ink belongs to someone new. When I look back now, the timeline feels blurred. What burned, what healed, what remained. I can't separate them anymore, and maybe that's the point. Maybe peace is not the opposite of pain, but it's evolution. There's a quote I once read, "The wound is where the light enters you." I never truly understood it until now, because light doesn't enter quietly. It forces its way through cracks, carves its path through scar tissue, and demands that you witness your own reconstruction. I have scars that don't hurt anymore, but when the light hits them right, they shine. Proof that I've been burned, yes, but also proof that I survived beautifully. The world still bruises me sometimes. A song, a smell, an unexpected kindness. They can still make my chest tighten, but that ache no longer feels like regression. It feels like reverence, a reminder that to be alive is to be sensitive enough to feel. Pain didn't make me bitter. It made me porous, and through those openings, the world can finally reach me. I've stopped searching for closure. Closure suggests a door that stays shut. Life, I've learned, doesn't work like that. Everything breathes, expands, and returns. Even the things you thought were over, especially those. Some nights, I light a single candle and watch the flame move. It reminds me of everything the fire taught me. How to destroy, how to rebuild, how to burn without apology. The candle flickers, and I whisper a thank you. To the pain, to the loss, to the person I was before the fire. Because without them, there would be no me. One day, maybe years from now, someone will look at me and say, "You've changed." And I'll smile. Not out of pride, but because I'll know they're right. I'll know that I've died 1,000 small deaths and been reborn just as many times. That's the Phoenix truth. You do not come back the same. You come back fluent in silence, comfortable in uncertainty, gentle with what once terrified you. You stop chasing peace and start embodying it. You stop fearing endings and start writing beginnings from their ashes. The fire didn't cleanse me to make me pure. It cleansed me to make me real, to remind me that pain is not punishment. It's participation. It's proof of life. I stand now at the edge of everything that burned and see not ruin, but renewal. The horizon is brighter than it's ever been. Not because the world changed, but because I finally did. This is what it means to rise. Not to escape the fire, but to carry its light everywhere you go. No one tells you that silence has sound. When the chaos stops, it hums. A low vibration that fills every corner of the room. At first I mistook it for loneliness. After months of fire and motion, the quiet felt foreign, like a stranger who knew too much about me. Every tick of the clock sounded like an accusation. You have no excuses left. Peace, I realized, is not granted. It's endured. It asks you to sit where pain once screamed and listen to what remains. The mornings were the hardest. The air too gentle, the light too kind. I'd wake expecting urgency, a problem to solve, a wound to soothe, but there was none. Just stillness, thick and unfamiliar. I wandered through the apartment, touching objects that no longer carried stories. The mug once shared, the chair where I'd written my way through heartbreak, the mirror that had learned every version of my face. Now they were only things, quiet witnesses. The world had moved on. It was waiting for me to notice. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything you used to ignore. The hum of the refrigerator, the heartbeat between thoughts, the whisper of your own breathing when you finally stop pretending to be busy. At first it felt unbearable. I wanted to run, to fill it with music, with messages, with noise that proved I was still alive. But the quiet didn't chase me. It waited. Patient. Kind. Peace doesn't pursue. It invites, and you either accept the invitation or spend your life inventing reasons to decline. So I stayed. I let the silence expand until it filled the room, until it pressed gently against my ribs and reminded me that I was still here. That's when I noticed the strangest thing. The silence wasn't empty at all. It was layered. Underneath the stillness was movement. Underneath the calm was pulse. Underneath the fear was a faint, steady sense of being held by something larger than thought. I realized that healing had never been about escaping noise. It was about learning how to listen once the noise was gone. The same quiet I'd once called punishment was now revealing what survival had hidden. The truth of who I was without the struggle. The clock kept ticking. Outside, the city began to stir. Inside, for the first time in my life, I didn't need the world to be loud for me to feel real. When the noise finally dies, what's left isn't emptiness. It's the sound of yourself, unfiltered, unhurried, alive. Silence doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives with mirrors. In the beginning, I mistook stillness for stagnation. I thought that if life wasn't loud, it wasn't living. But quiet days began teaching me something my chaos never could. That growth doesn't always make noise. In the mornings, I'd make coffee and sit by the window. No phone, no music, just the slow swirl of steam rising like thought made visible. And in that simple ritual, I started hearing things I'd never heard before. The rhythm of breath, the soft creak of the floorboards, the heartbeat steadying itself after years of sprinting. It felt almost holy, this noticing. The smallest details became lessons. The way sunlight waited before filling the room. The way dust glimmered only when I looked closely. The way peace whispered instead of shouted. Stillness doesn't speak in words. It speaks in patience. I began to understand why so many people fear silence. Because silence doesn't flatter you. It doesn't applaud or distract. It just waits for you to hear the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. At first, what I heard was uncomfortable. Regret, guilt, the ghosts of words I never said. But the more I listened, the more those voices softened. They weren't accusations. They were invitations. Each whisper asked the same question. Can you sit with what you are without trying to fix it? And for the first time, my answer was yes. The lesson wasn't in perfection. It was in presence. The art of being completely here. Not performing, not remembering, not anticipating. Just breathing in the moment that already exists. It's strange how much you can miss while waiting for something meaningful to happen. Silence showed me that meaning was never missing. I had been too busy managing time to experience it, so I started slowing down deliberately, eating slower, speaking slower, even thinking slower. The world didn't collapse. It expanded. Awareness, I learned, is a kind of love, the kind that asks for nothing in return. Some days I still caught myself searching for old chaos, checking for fires that weren't there, rehearsing arguments I'd never have again. But now I recognize that impulse for what it was. My mind missing the drama it mistook for purpose. And every time I chose to stay quiet instead of reacting, it felt like forgiveness. For the person I used to be, and for the noise that once kept me alive. Silence had stopped being a punishment. It had become a teacher, patient, precise, and endlessly kind. The loudest lessons don't come from answers. They come from listening until you finally understand the question. Peace doesn't erase what you've buried. It simply makes the ground quiet enough for you to hear what's still moving underneath. For weeks, the silence had felt gentle, like a warm blanket. Then, one evening, it changed. The air grew heavy, the room smaller, and I realized quiet has layers. The top layer comforts, the deeper one questions. I started noticing flashes of memory that arrived without invitation. The faces I'd disappointed, the apologies I rehearsed but never gave, the moments I'd rewritten to make myself the hero. They surfaced not to shame me, but to be acknowledged. That's when I understood that the work wasn't over. Healing had cleaned the wound, but silence wanted to show me the scar I'd been pretending not to see. I sat on the floor one night, lights off, no distractions. The kind of darkness that makes sound visible, and in that stillness, an old voice whispered, "You survived, but you never said goodbye." Goodbye to what? To who? The question echoed, and for the first time I didn't try to answer. I just listened. Silence has its own therapy session. You are both patient and therapist, both question and confession. It waits for honesty the way the ocean waits for the tide. One by one, the unsaid truths began to arrive. The guilt I felt for staying too long, the shame of leaving too soon, the anger that had turned to fatigue, the love that had turned to pity. Every emotion I'd labeled finished came back asking to be felt, properly this time. And I let them. I didn't analyze. I didn't perform understanding. I just felt. It was strange. The pain was softer now, not sharp like before, but dull, familiar, almost affectionate, as if the hurt had grown tired of screaming and just wanted to be held. Sometimes the voice inside silence isn't your past haunting you. It's your truth trying to come home. I realized then that healing isn't about moving forward. It's about moving inward, to the rooms you locked years ago because they were too loud. Silence holds the keys. When I opened those doors, I didn't find monsters. I found memories, scared, small, waiting to be named. I sat with them, one by one, and the longer I stayed, the quieter they became. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal. I forgive the versions of me that spoke in fear. And something inside exhaled, deeply, fully, completely. Silence doesn't demand closure. It teaches you to sit beside what remains open and call it peace. After the silence stops testing you, it starts teaching you how to live again. Not dramatically, just honestly. Days began to blur together, not because they were empty, but because they stopped demanding my attention. Every morning looked like the last. Sunlight across the kitchen tiles, coffee steam coiling through the still air, the world turning without needing my permission. And for the first time, that sameness didn't scare me. It soothed me. The stillness had matured into rhythm. It wasn't teaching anymore. It was being. I started finding beauty in small routines. Washing dishes, folding laundry, tying my shoes. The kind of moments I used to rush through, chasing the illusion that meaning only existed in milestones. But silence whispered a different lesson. That peace hides in repetition. That calm is not discovered, it's practiced. One afternoon, I walked to a park I hadn't visited in years. Children were playing. A man fed pigeons. Two old women argued softly about the weather. It was nothing extraordinary, but somehow it felt sacred, as if I'd stumbled into a temple made of ordinariness. Healing had made me sensitive to the smallest proofs of life. A breeze, a laugh, a stranger holding the door. I realized how much time I'd wasted chasing significance. always waiting for someday to feel alive. But aliveness was already here, in every breath that didn't hurt, in every quiet second that didn't demand explanation. I began to understand that living lightly doesn't mean living carelessly. It means carrying everything with open hands, knowing that love, peace, and even joy are meant to pass through you, not stay captive. There were days when the old ache returned, a smell, a song, a memory. But instead of running from it, I smiled. The ache wasn't a threat anymore. It was a reminder that I still had the capacity to feel. Silence had turned me into a better listener, not just to others, but to life itself. I started hearing meaning in ordinary sounds. The kettle's whistle, the page turning, the heartbeat I used to mistake for noise. One evening, I sat outside watching the sun lower itself behind the buildings. For once, I didn't need to capture it, post it, or narrate it. I just watched. The moment didn't need me to name it to be real. That's what living lightly means. Being a witness instead of a judge. Participating instead of controlling. Loving without the fear of loss. As night fell, I realized something simple. The silence that once terrified me had become the language I now spoke fluently. Every breath, every pause, every quiet decision. They all translated to the same truth. I am here, and that's enough. In the beginning, I listened to silence because I had nothing left to say. Now I listen because it answers in ways words never could. The quiet no longer feels like absence. It has texture, like air just before rain. Heavy, honest, full of meaning. Sometimes it hums, sometimes it waits. Always it tells the truth. I used to crave voices, validation, approval, affection, anything louder than my thoughts. But noise only ever taught me how to perform. Silence taught me how to hear. It showed me that I don't need to narrate every feeling, that there's a difference between expression and exposure. That peace doesn't need witnesses to be real. These days, I speak less but say more. I pause before replying. I let people finish their sentences. And sometimes, when there's nothing kind or true to add, I let quiet have the last word, because silence, when respected, becomes language. One morning, I woke before dawn. The world was still, the sky an unfinished shade of blue, and somewhere between heartbeat and breath I heard it, a faint, familiar voice, not from above, not from memory, from within. It didn't sound mystical. It sounded like me, only calmer. It said, "You've learned enough. Now live," I smiled. Because that's what silence had been trying to say all along. That peace isn't meant to be studied or protected. It's meant to be used. I walked outside, barefoot on cool ground. The street was empty except for the slow rise of day. Birds began to stir. Light spilled across windows. And for a moment, everything, the past, the ache, the fire, felt integrated, part of the same breath. I realized then that life doesn't speak in noise or silence. It speaks in rhythm, and if you listen closely, every pause is just another heartbeat continuing its sentence. I stopped asking silence for answers. I started answering with my life. The quiet that once scared me has become my home. Not a place without sound, a place where every sound has meaning. A voice that isn't loud, but true. And when the world grows noisy again, as it always does, I'll return here, to the silence that teaches, to remember what it means to really listen.